Now, as you watch the following dramatization, notice how Max and Irene and the family work together to make family worship successful.
March 15th, 2014, Watchtower. Family worship, can you make it more enjoyable? The worship of Jehovah should not be boring. Address the needs of each family member. Babe, what do our kids need? What's actually going on in their lives? Family worship needs to include that.
Maybe we need to pay more attention to what's going on with them. Talk to them, listen to them.
I'm going to send you a link to a great Watchtower article.
Ooh, he's a smooth talker, isn't he?
I can't wait to read it.
Seriously, you two, get a room already.
Max and I changed our approach.
We found out what mattered to our kids. Like friends.
Adjusting to a blended family.
Dating. So we turned things around and used family worship to focus on what our kids really needed. And to prepare ourselves for possible future trials. Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Ben.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children.
Good night, Daddy.
Family worship was cool. It was.
I'm glad you liked it.
Thank you.
Good night, y'all.
Night. Good night.
Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob.
What's going on? I was asleep. What's everybody doing?
Hey, guess what?
What? What?
I applied to Bethel.
You did?
Yep.
That's really exciting. I'm proud of you.
Thanks.
Aw, congratulations.
Thank you.
Hey, selfie time, everybody. Oh, let's go. Yeah. All right, on 3. We're going to say Bethel, okay? All right. All right. 1, 2, 3. Bethel.
We've come a long way. And through it all, Jehovah has taught us to love. And He's given our family peace.
This is a cold place, alone with you. Such a cold, cold place. This is a cold place, alone with you. Such a cold, cold place. Oh, it's a long, hard fall from the top of the world, but it's finally over.
Yes, it's smiles and high fives all round as this family gets its act together with family worship, and Gabe gets accepted for Bethel. I found it interesting that in the previous part of the dramatization where they were showing how not to do family worship, we actually got to hear what they were saying, and it was based on, you know, how clumsy it was in terms of the questions being asked and how irrelevant the material was. It was based on that the audience was encouraged to form the conclusion that this is not how to do a family worship. Then when we switch to how a family worship should be done, it's music and you don't hear what's being said. So you can't compare what's different in terms of the actual content of the family worship, which, if you think about it, it's really quite manipulative, isn't it? It's just saying, if you read the publications and if you follow our advice, your family worship will just be amazing and there'll be high fives all round and people will be doing presentations and there'll be laptops with images so people can look at an image while you're talking. There's nothing substantial for us to take away from the model family worship part of the dramatization that actually tells us in practical terms what changed. And that for me was kind of disingenuous. Then we have Gabe's revelation that he's been accepted for Bethel. Now, I found this interesting because, again, it's all hugs and happiness and smiles and say Bethel when they're taking a selfie. But what's actually involved in applying for Bethel? Well, if Tibor is gracious, we'll look together at the form that Gabe had to fill in, or would have to fill in if he were a real person. Application to become a Bethel family member in the worldwide order of special full-time servants of Jehovah's Witnesses. So you'll see there the place for putting a passport-style picture. It really gets interesting. You'll see there the personal profile section, but it really gets interesting when you scroll down to spiritual condition and background. Let's read some of these questions that Gabe would have had to answer. Have you been reproved by a judicial committee within the last 3 years? Yes or no? If so, when? And then a line. Have you been reinstated by a judicial committee within the last 5 years? If so, when? I find this very interesting from the concept of forgiveness, because isn't it supposed to be the case that once you've gone through the judicial process and either been reproved or disfellowshipped and later reinstated, isn't that supposed to mean that your sins have been forgiven, that the slate has been wiped clean, and you are to be embraced back into the congregation as a Jehovah's Witness in good standing? That's how it's supposed to be, and that's how it's kind of sold in the publications and in the video propaganda. But it's not quite how it works when it comes to Bethel applications. It turns out that there's a period of 3 to 5 years, depending on whether you've been reproved or disfellowshipped and then reinstated, where you might not be desirable to serve in Bethel. And that, for me, raises very interesting theological questions about to what extent you really are free from sin and to what extent you really are forgiven when you're a Jehovah's Witness who goes through a judicial process. Do you listen to music that features sexual immorality, violence, spiritism, profanity, or other subject matter inappropriate for a Christian? Tell us what music you listen to. In the past year, have you viewed material inappropriate for Christians, such as movies or videos featuring violence, spiritism, or sexual immorality, or pornography in printed form on the internet or otherwise? Have you ever had a homosexual relationship? Remember, Gabe's having to fill all this out. He can't just kind of skip and say NA, not applicable. He's got to say yes or no or give details. If you answer yes, please explain, and then there's a big long line where he needs to explain his homosexual relationship if he's had one. Have you ever engaged in child sexual molestation? You'd think it would just say, if you've ever engaged in child sexual molestation, have the police been informed? If not, when will they be informed? And by the way, you can't come to work at Bethel. But the question is asked, have you ever engaged in child sexual molestation? If so, when? What are your hours for each of the last 6 months? So when it says, what are your hours? What it means is literally how many hours have you spent preaching over the last 6 months? And he has to put in, Gabe, let's say, has to put in how many hours he's been stood next to the cart or bothering people at their homes. If your average hours are low, explain why. It's not just something between you and God. It's not just about your personal relationship with Jehovah. You need to explain to us why your average ministry hours are low. Since when have you been a regular pioneer? And here's an interesting question which kind of is quite triggering for me. Do you believe that spiritual food from Jehovah is being provided through the faithful and discreet slave? And are you living in harmony with its teaching? That's really a question intended to root out apostates or potential apostates. And I can remember being asked the same question when I applied to go to ministerial training school, which is now called the School for Kingdom Evangelizers. And I answered yes to that question, even though deep down the answer was no. If I was going to be brutally honest, I had doubts already at that point that it truly was God's organization. Then there's a section on health condition where it asks all sorts of questions about your medical history, not just your medical history, but that of your family. Question 6, are you currently taking any prescription medication? If yes, provide the name of the medication and the reason for taking it. No boundaries being crossed here whatsoever. Do you or any members of your immediate family have a history of nervous or emotional disorders? For example, major depression, panic attacks, chemical imbalance, paranoia, schizophrenia, attempted suicide. Not just Gabe or not just the Bethel applicant, but their family members. So their family members' medical data is being demanded, really, when you think about it, as part of this application process. Have you ever been afflicted by or diagnosed with diabetes, epilepsy, fainting spells, fibromyalgia, HIV, sexually transmitted diseases, hepatitis, high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney problems, tuberculosis, tendinitis, repetitive strain injuries, or other chronic infirmities? If yes, explain. Are you in need of, or are you receiving orthodontic treatment or any other extensive dental treatment? Give us your dental records or summarize them in the If Yes, Explain section. And then it gets really interesting when we scroll down to page 4 of this document. It's a 4-page document. for applying to Bethel. He's applying to work for free at Watchtower or Jehovah's Witness facilities. He's not being paid. He gets like a small allowance, peanuts basically. But Bethel or the organization are getting so much from this applicant, and yet they're asking all of these questions and they're being so demanding. Material below concerns the Congregation Service Committee. The Congregation Service Committee, think of it as the nucleus of the body of elders. So you have the coordinator of the body of elders, you have the service overseer who's responsible for organising the preaching work, and you have the congregation secretary. So those are the three on the service committee. Is the applicant a good kingdom publisher? Yes or no? What are his average hours in field service for the last 6 months? So asking the same questions to root out any dishonesty. Question 4, please describe the applicant's personal habits, dress and grooming, conduct with the opposite sex, association. Does he listen to music that features sexual immorality, violence, spiritism, profanity, or other subject matter inappropriate for a Christian? Apparently that's the sort of thing that elders should know. If you think about it, that's a direct mandate for elders to police the behavior of congregants. If they're even being asked that question, you know, an elder who isn't policing the congregants should be able to respond to that question by saying, well, how should I know? I'm not responsible for finding out what music this person listens to, but apparently elders are responsible. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asked the question. In the past year, has he viewed material inappropriate for Christians, such as movies or videos featuring violence, spiritism, or sexual immorality? Again, asking the same questions just to see whether he's lying, he or she, because I guess you can, in some circumstances, apply as a woman. Yeah, there are female Bethelites, but typically I would suggest it's men who usually get accepted to Bethel, and in certain situations, especially if they're very skilled, sisters will be encouraged, or women, I should say, will be encouraged to apply. Question 6, if the applicant has been disfellowshipped or disassociated in the past, was he or she reinstated within the past 5 years? So again, you have this period where you're forgiven, but you're not quite forgiven because you're limited or potentially limited in certain ways. Question 7, how would you frankly, be honest now, chaps. I know you weren't being frank before. I know you were dancing around the issue, but now's the time to get down to brass tacks. Now we want you to be honest and frank with us. How would you frankly describe the applicant's background, education, drugs, moral standing, home life, etc.? Elders are responsible for knowing your home life. They're not just there as spiritual shepherds. And you know what? It's only now going through the form that it's really... I mean, I knew elders were this controlling, obviously, but they, or Jehovah's Witnesses, tend to spin this narrative of elders purely being shepherds who provide pastoral care to the flock. But this form in black and white says different. This form in black and white is a mandate for elders to police and monitor the private, personal, and home lives of people in the congregation. Otherwise, why are they even asking the questions? Question 8, describe any difficulties you have had with the applicant. What was his response to any counsel given? Are you in full agreement with all the answers given by the applicant? Has he been lying to us? Has he been telling some porky pies? Question 10. Do you recommend the applicant for Bethel service? Explain why or why not. And then, the cherry on the cake, your personal rating of the applicant. Whenever possible, close relatives should not sign the application. Well, that's nice. There isn't any nepotism, at least in this document. But there's then a rating system, rating symbols to be placed in the boxes below. A being for excellent, D being poor, may not qualify. Alertness, appearance, poise. What's his poise like? We don't want anyone shabby. We don't want anyone who's slouching. We want someone who's really well poised. What's the attitude toward accepting hard work? Have they been put to work since they were 3? Probably David Splain put that one in the ranking system. Balance in judgment, emotional stability, adjusting to people, and spirituality. And you see there, the ratings need to be given by the coordinator of the body of elders, the secretary, the service overseer, again, the service committee, that's like the trinity of the service committee, and the circuit overseer, who visits the congregation only twice a year. Apparently the circuit overseer is in a position to answer all of those questions about how hardworking they are and what their poise is like. So just astonishing, isn't it? I'm really grateful in a way that this hideous convention has given me an opportunity to show you all this, because here we have Gabe all delighted about being accepted for Bethel in this dramatization. But what they were never going to show you in the dramatization is Gabe filling in this ridiculous form with its incredibly invasive, probing, inappropriate questions. This is what all Bethelites need to fill in. This is the form where they get ranked and rated by their elders. This is the reality of the Jehovah's Witness organization.